Hi everyone, and welcome to the Cutting Edge. We are going to present the Newcoin challenge for the hackathon. And so we'll start with some background about ourselves, present the concept of network intelligence, go through the dark secret of the Silicon Valley, then how synergy can solve this problem that we are going to discover, refactor the internet to build a sustainable Web3, and we will review the incentive structure for builders and then wrap it up. So a bit about myself. I'm Sofiane. I spent the last 20 years playing with algorithms and creativity. So that's the kind of topic I'm the most excited about. And everything I'm about to talk about now, to give some background, is based not on my personal opinion or some theory, but it's actually based on research and practice running an AI consumer product with blockchain and social components. And so we will talk about network intelligence. And so that's a great background to do that. So New Life was started in 2017, and it's a social AI crypto project. So it has all those three components with the goal to solve one problem, which is to allow creators to achieve consensus on what is valuable and to create a network that gets increasingly smarter at curation and generation of output, generative AI. So this was way before OpenAI. It was a very secretive project. We were inviting very few people to access it. So we had in total about 40,000 users who got invited. And we got infiltrated by Vice. We had some coverage on Dazed about how New Life was the AI-driven social media. So back in 2019. And so through that experience, through running this product, we collected 24 million interactions between creators. And each interaction works like a credential that add up to their reputation. So as a creator, you post something, people give you feedback. If you are good at giving feedback and if you are good at posting content, your reputation increases. And then each time you give a new feedback, that feedback has more value. And that's basically what we built. And so more recently, you might know, as everyone is talking about ChatGPT, ChatGPT is based on human feedback. It's the same concept of it generates something, and then you give feedback, and the AI learns based on that feedback. And so this concept called RLHF, reinforcement learning from human feedback, was already experimented within New Life way before OpenAI. We were using GANs, which were generative adversarial networks. It was before transformers. So the output was less photorealistic than what we have now. But this whole fundamental idea that creators can curate and give feedback and accumulate credentials and form an intelligence that reinforces and that grows as people use it is foundational to all the major products. And so as we will see, this is not happening in crypto yet. And so that's what we are going to talk about. One big question around creators is not really how many, because it's easy to get millions of users, but it's really about the who. Who are the creators that are the most relevant? And so through running this product, we got people from very cool brands, very famous things like Gucci, Balenciaga, and so on, who used the product, and they used it, including Grimes, because of the relevance of the discernment of the algorithm. So the algorithm was very smart at curating and at filtering the content. And so we use the same concept to launch NEWFORUM. NEWFORUM is the host of the hackathon. And so it's an independent entity from Newcoin, but it's using Newcoin as a tool for identifying the best minds in the space. New Life was mostly focused on Instagram. NEWFORUM is mostly on crypto Twitter. And so all those builders were identified thanks to the same algorithm. So we used likes and follows and retweets and so on as human feedback. And we replicated this graph to regenerate a leaderboard of the top minds in the space. And so NEWFORUM is the manifestation of that. So now let's dive into network intelligence. So we define network intelligence based on 3 core principles. The first one is robustness. The robustness principle is this idea that you have to be very open with the input and very strict with the output. So when you look at an internet browser, for example, it's very robust because it can correct HTML. If things are not perfect, it will still be tolerant towards it. Another example is Google. We will look at it later, but Google is very robust because it can accept any form of data structure, yet the output is very strict. It's a list of search results with the proper format. So robustness actually was invented by John Postel, one of the initial inventors behind TCP/IP. And that's the reason why we have internet. We wouldn't have internet without robustness. So robustness combined with adaptiveness. So when you have something, a system that adapts over time, that learns, that self-readjusts, you have an intelligent network. So when you combine robustness and adaptiveness, you have a recursiveness. And so what I mean by that is that if each time you have a data input that comes to a network that gets turned from unstructured to structured, and if each iteration the system gets smarter, you benefit from 1,000 users give feedback, user 1,001 benefit from the first 1,000. And so it keeps growing. Obviously, it's not just a linear progression, but it's a recursive progression. The system gets increasingly smarter. And so now let's look at the internet and this decentralized, centralized, and this manual labor versus network intelligence. So on the left side, at the bottom left, you have Yahoo. Yahoo used to be the most valued company of the internet. And what Yahoo was doing, for those who were not there, you would submit your website, pay $250, and then get people working at Yahoo from the team. It was very Web 1. They would review your website and decide to put it inside one of the categories of Yahoo. This was the most valued company in the internet. And in 2018, the Yahoo directory shut down. The reason for that is that Yahoo was not an intelligent network. The first intelligent network that was introduced is obviously Google. Google, instead of having humans who manually process every operation, it's based on an algorithm. So it started with PageRank. Now it's machine learning. It's very sophisticated now. But the logic is the same. It looks at internet data. It looks at behavior. It is robust because it can accept any format for the HTML page. It is adaptive because the more people use Google, each time you search, they look at your bounce rate. If you go to a website and you bounce back, they learn from that and they improve. And it has a recursive nature. So Google, it's $1 trillion company. TikTok, very similar, very intelligent network. It learns from your behavior. So instead of looking at follow relationships or likes, TikTok is looking at how you respond when you get this video in front of your eyes. And it collects a lot of all sorts of data and it turns it into something that's recursively, gaining intelligence. GPT, we talked about it earlier, similar. It gets smarter. The more you use it, the more feedback you give to it, the more it can self-readjust its algorithm. So that's network intelligence in the age of Web 2, in the centralized world. And we don't like the centralized world because of so many reasons, ethical reasons, concentration of power, extractiveness, and so on. And so when you look at Web 3, you have networks that are not so smart in the sense that they are not increasing their intelligence over time. You keep doing the same stuff. The smart contracts will process your transaction, but you don't have this like recursive model where the more you use the product, the smarter it gets. And this is because Web3 products so far have been first focusing on decentralization. And second, because the kind of computation that those guys on the top left are doing are very difficult to decentralize. And so what Newcoin is offering, and what we have been working on for the last 6 years, is giving that intelligence to Web3. And so we found a way to achieve that, to turn all those NFT markets, all those Web3 social and so on, into systems that are potentially smarter even than the guys on the top left. And so the way we achieve that, and maybe first, yes, I will dive into this. I promised at the beginning, the dark secret of Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is based on intelligent creative networks. So you have creators who produce creative energy, and that creative energy is organized in the form of data by those networks. And so you have content networks, social networks, blockchain networks, neural networks, and you have emerging networks. And so the reason why Ethereum is still so small and crypto networks are still so small is that those guys, like look at Google, the size of Google, are based on the idea that as you use those services over time, you have an investment into them that you cannot take away, which is all the history of human feedback that you accumulate, all the likes, all the follows, all the credentials that are stuck inside those platforms. As you grow your account, as you develop your account, when you spend 5, 7, 10 years on Twitter, there is no way you're gonna let go of that, because it's years of your creative energy, it's years of your life. And so because they own that, they can anchor you into those networks and you cannot escape. And that's the reason why when you have 44 billion as a seed round, you could launch a new network and be very successful. Yet, Elon Musk decided to give away that money to the shareholders of Twitter. And he was right, because when you look at Threads, Threads failed to take the users of Yahoo. Even though Threads have no problem with onboarding, has no problem with generating network effects, building beautiful products that have good UX. And so what it tells us here is that it's going to be very difficult for Web3 to move users to this space without solving that problem. And so that problem is, again, how do you compensate for all those years of creative energy that people invested to build their identity as a creator? And so this creative energy is locked, as we just saw. So, as you use those services, you keep growing your cage inside those networks. And the solution, the Newcoin solution, is synergy. So the goal here is not to create one more protocol or one more network or one more blockchain or one more data standard, but it's really to look at how we can interconnect all those networks together. And obviously it's very difficult because every network has a different data standard. And so we found a formula to achieve that. And so this formula is called the proof of creativity algorithm. So it's an algorithm. On the input, it takes all kinds of feedback from humans, whether it's on-chain or in Web2, social graphs. It turns it into an algorithmic identity proxy. And basically what you get is a non-transferable fungible token, which represents your creative energy. And so by doing that, basically what we are achieving is taking all the intelligence from all the networks, analyzing it. So it's a robust model where it's very open. The kind of data inputs is very flexible. But the output is unified, strict, simple. You just query a token balance. Those tokens cannot be sold. They cannot be bought. They sit on your wallet and they tell all the other networks your weight as a creator. So all those years that you invested are now represented by one number that coordinates all those networks. And so what it does first is adding a recursivity. So what I mean by that is if you get a like on Twitter from someone who has a lot of watts, that will influence your watt score more than from some random bot. If you sell an NFT to someone with a high amount of watts, again, it will give you more watts. So Newcoin is dogfooding its own system in a recursive way. Second thing that happens is that any system, whether it's system contract, smart contract, backend, AI, social platform, clients can query your watts and enhance their experience. So we'll talk about how does the experience look like for the users? So as a user, very simple. You come, you connect your networks, and then you can distribute some of that power to other users. So we know about Metcalfe's law, the concept of network effect. When you add to Metcalfe's law data persistence, you add a multiplier to it, because it's not just the amount of users who can interact with each other, but it's about how the data compounds and how over time the system has more and more and more data and it gets smarter. When you add on top of this an algorithm that computes that data and gives it more meaning, and you add on top of it machine learning that will change the algorithms, that will adjust, that will adapt the algorithms, then you have something extremely powerful. And on top of that, you add network synergy, meaning that all the networks are now sharing the same intelligence. Instead of having Google or Facebook or TikTok trying to build their intelligence to outcompete others, TikTok outcompeted Instagram because they had a smarter algorithm. Here, the idea is that all the networks share it. It's public, it's self-sovereign, meaning your watts are sitting on your wallet and nobody can take them from you, and you can go with them anywhere you want. So we are talking about a very wide diversity of networks. We are talking about neural networks, broadcast networks, recommendation networks, citation networks, and so on, who are now able to achieve synergy because they talk the same language, which is the language of the watts. So let's say you have a like on Twitter that will influence the way the machine learning model is working. You sell an NFT on OpenSea, it will influence how your content will rank on Lens. So the goal is to create this synergistic relationship between all networks and have this interconnected graph. So when we talk about, and the reason why we are here today is we want to refactor the internet. What has been tried until now is we have Web2. If we give people more money to use the same kind of stuff, but the Web3 version of, they will come. And yes, they come, but they go back. And that's why we have bear markets. They come as long as the price of the tokens keep going up, everyone is excited, everyone is like in this frenzy. And then at some point, someone is gonna dump. And then all the thing that was driving this growth completely collapses and people basically leave the party, except for us who stayed during the bear market. But another approach is possible. What if instead of paying people to stay, we would actually use Web3 for what it's good at, which is interoperability, which is decentralization. And instead of trying to create a new ecosystem and ask people to change and use new apps, we would allow them to stay in the same apps and dissolve them, dissolve the hegemony of those apps by taking away, stripping away progressively all its data, all its substance, all its intelligence, and turn it into a shared intelligence, an open intelligence that everyone can tap into and consume. So that's Newcoin. Self-sovereign identity is this idea that users own the data. What we are offering with Newcoin is really this network synergy where the algorithm is shared between all the users, between all the networks, sorry. And so as we drive more networks, the system gets smarter and that intelligence benefits all the systems. So during the hackathon, we are looking for projects that are either existing networks or new networks or tools that connect Newcoin to other networks as a middleware. So Newcoin is really a middleware. Newcoin is not a network per se, but this middleware can speak to any blockchain, any database. It's completely interoperable. And so the robustness principle here is that we can take any data input and turn it into the Watt score to create this like probabilistic state machine where everyone is contributing to the data state, no matter what it is, if it's a like or if it's a star on GitHub or if it's all those things prove people's creativity, and that consolidates into the Watt state, which is deterministic, which is blockchain. So now let's look at the diagram of how Newcoin works under the hood. So on the left side, you have off-chain and on-chain events. I will let Luke give more details about how it actually works technically, but very briefly, we take all those events, we send them to the encoder. The encoder generates neural tokens, which are then processed by the algorithm, and then you get the watt output. And then anyone can query those watt outputs. So it can be an AI that needs to understand if a data point is valuable. It can be blockchain. It can be used for pricing transactions. So let's say you can say Ethereum today has to stay expensive even after the merge to prevent all forms of bot attacks. So, if you take the transaction fee to 0.5 cents, you would get tons of bots and the price would go back to $20. So how do you actually solve that problem? Either you penalize everyone and you say, okay, we're going to keep the gas fee high, $5, $10, or we adapt the price based on the wattage of the user. And so if as a user, I come and I have 20 watts, I would get free transactions. And if it's an unknown wallet, it would still pay the normal price. So those are examples of use cases of what can be done with the watts. It can be used obviously for social media, for curation, for governance, and it allows all those networks to grow smarter. So how does this make Web3 sustainable? So we talked about the bear markets, bull market, bear markets. How do we stop that? And how do we create something that keeps going up? And now is the time where this is going to happen. This time now, so the last bear market, it was the time where NFT markets were being built. OpenSea was created in 2017. This year, 2023, is the time where the new generation of startups will emerge. And in 24, 25, we'll be like, oh, if I knew, I would have built this, but yeah, it's too late already. Those guys, you here in this call, you here watching, are building what's coming in the next 2 years. And what's coming in the next 2 years is a sustainable Web3 that takes into account the deterministic and the probabilistic into a continuum. So what I mean by that, blockchains are very smart at propagating transactions. So you have many nodes and someone moved one Bitcoin from one place from one wallet to another wallet, and all the nodes have to agree. And this is pretty solid. We don't see so many hacks maybe on the wallet level or on the contract level, but blockchains are solid when it comes to that. But because it's very hard to steal money by using brute force or by using technical means, all the madness, all the attacks, all the vulnerability is placed on the decision layer, on the individual decisions that people will take to move their tokens towards fraud, towards a scam, towards all kinds of places where the funds are being basically stolen. And so in order to have a robust and solid decision layer, we need to have a different kind of consensus mechanisms around assessment. And so the value assessment with Newcoin is the valuation of the creativity of something, meaning on an NFT market, you could have the NFTs ranked by the watts of the user. And then you would be able to use that as a better guide for decisions. When it comes to developers, ICO, IDOs, you can use the watts to decide, again, this team has a lot of watts. It could be an anonymous team. You don't care if they put their name, but you know that they have accumulated a lot of positive feedback from other creators throughout their career. And so you can trust that. And so the watt is going to guide these kind of decisions and protect you from people sending you a DM. You can instantly check their watts and decide if you want to interact with them. But smart contracts can also do it. Algorithms can also do it. The whole internet gets much more safe and relevant when it comes to allocating value and supporting creators. So now let's talk about the prize. We are reaching the end of the presentation. So we have different prize during the hackathon. We also have bounties and grants, which can be disclosed if you are interested. We have a whole table full of ideas and things that need to be built, tools. And then it's not about just like a one-off, but it's really about building a sustainable long-term business. And so on Newcoin, creators need what to grow their reputation. In order to grow watts, you need to create a lot of credentials. Those credentials consume space, block space, and you need to stake Newcoin to get more block space, which creates a supply-demand situation where you have more and more and more drain of Newcoin because it's being staked, and you have an increasing demand because you have more networks and more creators who are asking for credentials. And then obviously it creates, flywheel where because the price goes up, creators are more motivated to mine those Newcoin. And you can create all kinds of business models around that. You can ask creators to stake in you and receive the creator fees to deliver your product. So let's say you create a tool to verify proof of creativity on Twitter or GitHub or Stack Overflow or Ethereum or any source that can prove someone's creativity. They can pay you for that. You can also sell NFTs. You can sell NFT tickets to use your service. And so this is a long-term opportunity. It's not just a one-off, and it's something that creators will need. It's not just speculation. It's like something where they can grow their career, and so they will need those services. So to summarize, we are at the end of the presentation. So proof of creativity is a probabilistic state based on human feedback from heterogeneous sources processed through parallel computations to achieve a shared consensus state to enable adaptive learning and self-sovereign identity paradigm. The Newcoin ecosystem rewards creators, smart oracles, and networks with soul-bound and transferable tokens to reward their contribution to the exponential network intelligence. So as the network gets smarter, the demand for that network increases, and everyone gets rewarded. Beyond the hackathon and the bounties, what you are building is the ramps for a new internet where creativity is the currency. So thank you so much. And I will give the mic to Luke for a little dive into the technical aspects, the smart contracts, the oracles, and so on.
So start off with a slight confession that the goal of for me today in this workshop was to have a kind of UI based example of the flow that we're looking to demonstrate. So I was currently racing to finish that off just in time. I guess a sort of risky strategy of building as we workshop and as we demonstrate. So that part of the flow, the UI, and I can give you an idea of what we were hoping to make it look like here, is just a slight illustration of what, from a user perspective, the flow that somebody would go through to be able to use this architecture that we're talking about in a minute. And it's kind of like 95% ready, unfortunately, so not ready to demonstrate the whole flow. But actually, it makes sense because what I really wanted to talk through was some of the more architectural and technical parts of what we're doing. So I thought the best way to do it was I'm going to put it into Remix, and then we can show the flow that we're looking to illustrate, and hopefully that'll give a clean and overarching view of what we're looking to show here. So to give an idea of the approach, some people I know on the call have seen this before, but there's also some details we can get into. I know Mark's on the call, and we were talking about some cool solutions with oracles. I know there's more to come, and this is one example of an oracle-based solution that we're using for the time being, and lots of fun exploration to do there on different approaches. But so sort of bridging from where Sofiane was talking about, we've got what's this universal indicator of value and creativity, which can then be used in these different ecosystems across over here, across the web and otherwise. And then we've got an algorithm that feeds into how these whats are then going to be generated. So the question today is, how do we impact and influence that algorithm? And what should be able to do that, and how does it work? So we've got the first thing to mention just conceptually is we've got these concepts called neural tokens, which are subcategories of creativity. So it's just, I think of that as a way to, when someone's building or looking to find some way of measuring creativity, we're sort of asking what type of creativity are we talking about? So for instance, skill what is an example I'm going to use today. So we want to attest to the fact that someone has a certain skill, and then that's then going to be fed into the algorithm. So this is all happening as a smart contract, which we're going to mock today, which will illustrate the rest of the flow that I'm looking to illustrate. So there's a relationship between these neural tokens and then the ability for those neural tokens to be weighed and weighted against the other sets of neural tokens to be able to generate watts. And so slightly further down the line, and closer to what we're going to be looking at as smart contracts today firstly, what I'll do is divide up, I suppose, this diagram here in terms of what the user will be doing, what the developer, sort of indie or otherwise developer, would be contributing to this ecosystem to be open-ended and decentralized and all-encompassing in terms of what creativity can encompass. And then what sort of Newcoin house architecture. So this stuff here, anything beyond here is on the right is Newcoin house architecture. Obviously, where it'll be used is up to the gods and more the merrier. But in terms of the structure, this is Newcoin architecture here. There's always questions around how we will decentralize this algorithm and make that as community generated and open-ended as possible. But for the most part, for now, this is house architecture. So neural tokens for now. Just a side note on that, I think there's a really interesting idea on opening the categories or subcategories of creativity as well to make that community generated, so people can have more specific tokens that would then be fed into creating and representing watts. So creativity, you could even have, there's been a great example, I think, shout out to you here, Patrick, you could have a BJJ or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu neural token. And so people would be creating conditions that would be able to generate that, and then based on consensus could then be fed into an overarching measure of creativity. But to keep it simple for now, we've got these subcategories which are house generated. And then we have what we call the encoder. So the encoder is just a handler and has the permission to be able to generate neural tokens. Otherwise, anyone would be able to generate them at any time, and it sort of renders the whole process irrelevant. It's almost like minting your own Bitcoin or something like that. So this encoder is the handler, which is the gateway to the community generated, user-based and developer-based what's the word I'm looking for? Contributions to creativity that we're looking to create. So this is what I'm going to be demonstrating here today. So just to complete this picture, we've got an activation function, which is the developer-generated contribution. So an activation function is some kind of measurement of creativity that would exist somewhere on-chain or off-chain that then can be submitted to the encoder and then approved, submitted with a certain weight as to the amount of neural tokens that can generate, and then approved if that is appropriate. Again, this is a centralized process for now, but obviously makes sense to be decentralized going forward, what that approval process looks like. But it basically means, is it a worthwhile condition to measure? And is that condition that we're measuring appropriate in terms of the amount of creativity that it then generates? It's not infinity and it's not zero. It's something appropriate in between. And so we're encouraging developers, and that's a big part of this hackathon, to create these activation functions. We've got some really exciting examples coming through to create these activation functions, and they can broadly be broken down. I don't think it's completely true comprehensively anymore, but it's broadly be broken down into two categories. We've got on-chain events, and then we've got off-chain events, online events that can be accessed via oracles. And we're actually going to go through that example today. Examples of on-chain events would obviously be things like, is someone a holder of a particular token? Is there a cool, quote unquote, if that word even exists in Web3 anymore, but a cool kind of NFT collection that means that I want to measure the holders of those NFT collection and the updated condition of those holders. You might be a holder at one point and that might no longer be true. So that's a good example of an activation function that we're measuring on-chain conditions. And off-chain is an oracle basis of anything that we'd want to measure on the web. So an example would be, does somebody have X amount of Twitter followers, or has there been a like by a high impact individual on some kind of social media platform? And the one we're going to go through today, if there's any questions on that for now, just because I don't want to lose anyone on on that kind of stuff. But otherwise, I'll dig into the flow and the code, and we can walk through that. But do jump in at any time if there are. And the one we're going to look into today is a activation function that measures eventually and primarily whether or not someone is human. And the way we're doing that is using the Gitcoin passport for measurement of humanity, which, for anyone who doesn't know, just gives you a score based on certain stamps or conditions that you can achieve across different metrics, but again, both on-chain and off-chain, that can generate a score, and then you can kind of get gradients of that score. So we're looking today at the lowest level of that score. But not just that, that score, or having that score, can then gain you access to a particular guild on guild.xyz. So you can run checks on guilds that will attest to whether or not you have that minimum member of that score. And if you do, then you become a member of that guild. And so that's what we're checking today. If someone is a member of that particular guild and has that role for that low-level score of proof of humanity. And just a quick note to the sort of approach we're taking, not even from just a partner sense, because there's amazing partners to collaborate with here, and we're hopefully doing that with a few of them. But from an architectural and philosophical standpoint, I think whereas some architectures, I think dependency and cross collaborations would be a weakness. I think in Web3 that's a strength, to be able to be interoperable with different architectures, and then we'll gate what that interoperability is, and so we can chop and change what we might want to relate to. So that's the approach that we're taking. So what we've got here, going into Remix, so I can show you the code whilst we also demonstrate the process, which in theory, just to say again, would be registering this activation function, going through this process and checking these conditions, which is, like I say, 95% complete, but not enough to show you the generation of watts at the end, which I'd really like to show you. So just give you a sort of a cheeky little preview of what I would like it to be. But so we've got three contracts here. We've got the encoder. The encoder is obviously needed to mediate this process. As I mentioned before, we've got an example of this guild passport activation function. And then we've got what is actually a mock, just because we don't want to be dealing with real watts here in this process, a mock version of that proof of creativity algorithm, which would handle both the generation of neural tokens, so sub-watts, and then the translation of neural tokens into generating watts for the address in question. So I'll break that down. So I'm playing kind of three roles here, and I'll try and be clear about what I'm playing while I'm going through that. One is the role of acting as the Newcoin Foundation, which has deployed these Newcoin-based contracts and will also approve this activation function. And again, in theory, that's a decentralized process. We're acting in a centralized way, obviously, today. And then I'm also acting as the developer that is submitting this activation function, because it's a cool thing to check if someone's human. And that is a good indicator of some kind of creativity, I suppose, being human. And then I'm also acting as the user that is going to go ahead and engage with an approved activation function and then get given watts because I am complying with that condition. So I'm going to walk you. So I've deployed the contracts already, but what we will do, and so when I've deployed my encoder, that's obviously registered on deploy, on being constructed alongside that proof of creativity algorithm. So that's untouchable. And then I've got my activation function here, and just a quick walkthrough of what we're doing. So on the creation of the activation function, this is a asynchronous type activation function, meaning it's using an oracle. And so the only unfortunate thing about that for now, in terms of the flow, that's not ideal for me, but is a current state of affairs, state of the art, I suppose, to my knowledge at least, about how oracles work, is we've got to separate the flow of checking that condition and of requesting that data. So requesting the data of, do I have access to this particular guild? And this is the request function, which we're going to go through in a minute. And this would all be streamlined in some kind of user interface, but from a contract engagement perspective, there's two separate functional flows that we have to go through. So we've got a request function. On deploying the contract, I've initiated it with a chain link, the chain link token, which we need to feed the Oracle and pay for the Oracle. We've got the Oracle address that we're using, and we've got the job ID. So this is an example of what a developer would be doing in this hackathon or otherwise, is constructing some kind of condition, saying this is an Oracle-based condition, so I'm going to need an Oracle. I'm going to need I've used an existing Chainlink Oracle, but I can deploy my own. I've got a job ID. This means what type of data are we getting back from the Oracle? So in this case, and most often, it's going to be a Boolean, true or false. Is this person fulfilling this condition? So different jobs are for different types of data that are coming back. And then we've got the method for interacting with that Oracle. So what we're going to do is we're just doing a GET request. This is the address. And then this is the rest of the request that we're constructing. And then as a developer here, I've come to know the structure of the request for accessing that data from guild. And this particular role that I'm looking for to check for this particular level of membership of proof of humanity is number 20. And I want to check the access function. Do they have access or not? And then what's going to happen is this request is then going to send it to the Oracle. We're going to store the request ID here so that we can reference the sender of this request, so that we can relate the request to the person that's checking this condition. And then there's going to be a fulfill function, which is going to be handled by the Oracle. It's going to be called by the Oracle. It's going to come back with a request ID. So this needs to be constructed in a certain way, and we're going to set this record chain link fulfillment aspect of the contract here, which is coming from the chain link contracts. And then on that request ID being fulfilled, it's going to update my state, and that state is then going to be available to be checked for my activation function, if that makes sense. So like I say, this is all sort of the innards of the activation function. Ideally, this would all be being checked in one flow once it's approved by the user. And the only exception to that now is that we have to, as a user, we have to check for me to check if I'm a member of this guild. We have to ask that request to be met, and then we have to run the normal activation function. That request has to be handled separately, just because chain link oracles, link node oracles they're called, or at least the ones that I know of, are not able to handle that complex a fulfill function. If they have cross-contract calls or very elaborate sort of functional flows, then they tend to not work, unfortunately. So that's a community-based front that we can all push forward on, and hope we have some more sophistication there as an approach. So that's a rough breakdown of the activation function and how that works in regards to the Oracle. And I'm just going to run through so that I can make sure that Mark gets on. So what we're going to do is we're going to submit this activation function. We are going to, in fact, maybe I can pass to Mark, because it's going to take a second for this Oracle to respond. So maybe I can pass to Mark, and then I can show you the consequence of that being engaged with, maybe at the end if we have time. But basically, just to summarize the flow, sorry, I've gone more into the code than the actual flow, but all we do is we would have this activation function submitted to the encoder as a developer. That would then be checked and improved. And as soon as that's approved, then anybody can come along, then they can register that check and that condition. Am I a member of that guild? And then after that check being met, going to the Oracle, coming back saying yes, which takes a little bit of time, maybe 30 seconds or so, then I can run that check to be able to mint myself watts. So I've been approved of meeting a certain condition of creativity, and automatically I'm going to be given watts as a consequence as a user of having met that condition. So maybe I can show you me having what's at the end from going through that process, but I'll hand over to Mark and maybe apologize if I've gone too much into the weeds without the flow, but hopefully that was interesting and useful to somebody out there.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Luke. And then I just want to thank the Newcoin team for having me. So I know we have limited time left. I'll kind of do a speed run of what I do, what Ceramic is, what ComposeDB is. And then I'll get into as much as we can of what I've prepared. But if we need to create a new session, that's fine as well. So let's start with what Ceramic is, and then just quickly what our current focus looks like, and then where we're headed. So Ceramic is built on IPFS, specifically the IPLD content addressing protocol, and ComposeDB is a graph-based database built on top of Ceramic. So it's a more opinionated way to view, query, read, and mutate data. Different documents in the Ceramic ecosystem are controlled by DIDs, and so in that way, there's clear provenance of data that's created, and the only person that's able to mutate or change or make further changes to existing documents that already exist are the creators of those documents themselves. So there's always a controller attributed to each document. And then, of course, if you don't already know, Ceramic is also periodically, every 5 minutes, they're sort of rolled up onto the Ethereum blockchain as a Merkle tree root, which gets published. So it is traversable back to like an on-chain ability to view what's been created given a certain time period. So in that way, it kind of functions as like a middle ground or data ledger, as we like to call it, between the on and off-chain realm. And I think where I'll go from here is just a quick note on why we're focusing so much on identity and reputation. So the obvious benefits to be gleaned from a system like Ceramic and ComposeDB is that mutating data is of course possible, whereas when you're dealing with smart contracts, you're dealing with this immutable code. And so you still are able to draw on the provenance of DIDs owning each document, and then those eventually getting rolled up to the Ethereum blockchain. But because identity itself is dynamic over time, people, of course, change, their preferences change, their relations with other people or entities change. That needs to be reflected in a decentralized way. And so that's kind of a brief overview of why identity and reputation is a major focus of what we're focusing on. So I think what I'll do is just really quickly jump into what I kind of an initial prototype that I put together specifically for Newcoin, and then I'll make a quick note of the work that we've been doing with EAS, and then how I think the two can come together. So you'll notice that some of my terminology is a little bit outdated because it reflects like in earlier naming conventions related to Newcoin system. But in effect, we have issuer instances, each of which would be created by specific entities, and then they would have to be approved by Newcoin. Those represent different agents within Newcoin's ecosystem, each of which have different watt weights, and then each issuer instance is tracked back against a different watt type or template type. So a given agent could have presumably as many watt types as there are in this enum. When a context is created, let's say someone wants to attribute creative energy against a piece of art, for example, that a specific context entity or document rather would be created, and then power up instances would be tracked back against that specific document or that specific context. So different agents, the ecosystem, each of whom having different watt types and attributed multipliers, can create power up instances against, for example, using the example that I used before, artwork. And as these are created, they can be aggregated, and then that that creative energy could be then consumed. And so that's also part of the design pattern that we still need to solve for. And I don't think we'll have time to get into that today. But I just want to quickly point out how we're kind of thinking about this now in terms of attestation. So you may or may not have read this brief tutorial that I put together for EAS, just how to store attestations using this very simple type met in real life. It's just a Boolean value, yes or no, and then you have a recipient on ComposeDB. And in doing so, and in talking to the Newcoin team this week, I was thinking, well, it would probably make sense to have issuer instances, for example, be attestations themselves, just because those would have to be then approved by Newcoin. And so in a similar way, you have this UID field within each attestation created by EAS, where you can have a confirmation of that attestation. So that is one of the processes that I walked through in this tutorial, and it's also something that I just this morning, similar to Luke, kind of threw together like an early prototype for. And so in effect, this serves the same purpose as the models I just walked through, but it would then incorporate or have the ability to incorporate the meat of the attestations, the cryptographic signatures of the attestations themselves using EAS. So just showing how the two can be interoperable, but remain highly efficient when it comes to querying speed, to querying on relations. And so that's also an upgrade that you'll see with these create index indicators or directives that you don't see in this earlier prototype. And that actually just reflects improvements that have been made to ComposeDB between this first prototype and what I put together this morning, namely the ability to query filter in order based on subfield, which just went live about a month ago. So again, just trying to drive parity between Web 2 and Web 3 databases and efficient querying. I was going to try to talk about how then we could potentially integrate like, event listeners that are listening to specific on-chain behavior to then, mutate data and mutate documents or mint new documents within Ceramic, but we might have to save that for a separate time. And I apologize for the speed run through what we just went through. Also, this repository in its earlier form is up on my personal GitHub, but I think what I'll do is just push this up once I validate that it works, just in case anyone's interested, and then I'll share it in the hackathon Telegram. And I think that's all we have time for. I apologize, but if there's interest in doing another session, I'd be happy to. So
please don't apologize. That's definitely an invitation to give you the proper time for this, because this technology is impressive. The kind of stuff that we have been talking about are around having the same level of authenticity as blockchain operations, but without all the crazy implications of blockchains, which are not just the cost, but also the necessity for users to go on an exchange, KYC, get their gas, and so on. Like, you can get the same level of authenticity as blockchain without any of that, which is super impressive and very cool stuff. And yeah, definitely let's give it a proper dedicated time. And thank you so much everyone for attending. Thank you, Mark. Very impressed also by what you have done.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Mark. That was super interesting as always. Looking forward to connecting more.
Yeah, likewise. I love the new foundation team. So looking forward to continued collaboration.